Namaste. Good morning and a very hearty welcome once again to the ceremony of the Association of Indian Universities Central Vice Chancellors Conference hosted by Shri University. Welcome all the delegates, dignitaries, participants, everyone. First of all, I wholeheartedly thank all participants, all delegates, and all panelists for creating an enriching experience for everyone through a day of deliberations, discussions, and participation. Now, after yesterday's challenging and fruitful time that focused on teaching, learning, and secondly on research, we are now ready for the third technical session of the day, promoting internationalization. This session starts now, and to conduct the session, I invite the MC of the session, Mr. Pankaj Vij. Good morning, Mr. Vij. Please check over the stage and please conduct the session. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. A very good morning, everyone. After a very engaging and fruitful day one, I, Pankaj Vij, welcome everyone for the technical session 3, titled Promoting Internationalization. The world is looking towards India for solutions, like we have emerged as IT leaders during the Y2K issue, like the way India is becoming the pharmacy capital of the world due to our domestic capabilities. Our latest example is India has become the fastest country to administer COVID vaccine to 6 million people. How we are showing our mettle in space research, like we launched 104 nanosatellites in one go, of which 96 were of US. It is time that we innovate, we upgrade and upscale in the field of education and reach out to the world community. The goal of internationalization at home can be achieved if we are aligned to the global quality standards. This requires internationally relevant curricula, quality residential facilities, a good international experience to foreign students in India, and many, many more things. Research collaboration and student exchanges between Indian institutions and global institutions also to be promoted. With a small note, now I take this privilege to welcome the esteemed dignitaries to a very interesting discussion on this topic. The chairperson for this technical session 3 is Padma Shri Professor Dinesh Singh, former Vice Chancellor, Delhi University. Padma Shri Professor Dinesh Singh is a distinguished mathematician and educationist. He has studied at St. Stephen's College and holds a PhD from the Imperial College of Science, Technology and Medicine, London. He is a distinguished senior fellow, Advanced Hackspace, Imperial College, and also adjunct professor, University of Houston. He was awarded the Padma Shri by the President of India in 2014. He has been conferred honorary doctorates for his work as a mathematician and an educationist by the University of Edinburgh, the National University of Ireland, Cork, the University of Houston, to name a few. He has played a significant role in various committees and associations of national and international eminence. We welcome you, sir. We have with us Dr. Vidya Yeravdekar, Pro-Chancellor, Symbiosis International University, Pune. Dr. Vidya Yeravdekar, who's ranked number 14th among India's top 25 powerful women by Fame India magazine, is the Principal Director of Symbiosis Society, which encompasses the Symbiosis schools, College of Arts and Commerce, and institutions under the Symbiosis International University. He has been instrumental in bringing in innovative approaches to promote internationalization. leadership have been instrumental in creating strategic collaborations with universities across the globe. He has also served as a member in many eminent organizations of national significance. He is the chairperson of the FICCI Committee on Higher Education. He has been elected as a member of the Central Governing Council of Services Export Promotion Council set up by the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. It is an apex trade body which facilitates service exporters of India. We welcome you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Mr. Francisco J. Marmolejo, Education Advisor, Qatar Foundation, Qatar. Mr. Francisco Marmolejo is an international education administrator. He had served as lead tertiary education specialist of the World Bank. At this institution, he served as global coordinator of tertiary education from 2012 to 2018 and from 2016 to 2020 as lead education specialist for India and Asia. He had served as a founding executive director at the Consortium for North American Higher Education Collaboration, a network of more than 160 colleges and universities from Canada, US, and Mexico. Mr. Marmolejo has consulted for universities and governments in different parts of the world and has been part of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, and World Bank international peer review teams of experts in conducting evaluations of higher education in Europe, Latin America, Africa, Middle East, and Asia. He was actively involved in the creation of the network of international education associations, which brings together the leaders of the most important international education association of the world. At NIEA, he served as a member of the board. He has also been conferred honorary doctorate degrees for his contribution for international education. Very happy to have you here, sir. A third speaker, Professor Varghese, Vice Chancellor, NIEPA. Professor N.V. Varghese is currently the Vice Chancellor of National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration, New Delhi. He is also the founding director of Center for Policy Research in Higher Education. He was head of governance and management in education at the International Institute for Education Planning, Paris till October 2013, and head of its training and education program from 2001 to 2006. He was responsible for designing and introducing the IIEP Master's Program in Educational Planning and Management. Very glad to have you here among us. Last speaker, Mr. Anthony Miranda, Country Counsellor for Cultural and Educational Affairs, U.S. Embassy, India. Mr. Anthony joined the U.S. mission to India as the countrywide Cultural and Educational Affairs Counselor in August 2020, where he led efforts to engage with audiences in India, Bhutan, and Tibetan community resident in India. Previously, he served as a Public Affairs Counselor in the U.S. mission to the United Nations. Overseas, he served as the Head of Public Affairs in the U.S. Consulate General in Munich, Germany, the Director of Public Diplomacy Field Programs at the U.S. Embassy in Kabul, Afghanistan, the Cultural Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Sofia, Bulgaria, and as a Counselor Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Madrid, Spain. Very happy to have you here, sir. Now, I would request the Chairperson, Padma Shri, Professor Dinesh Singh ji, to kindly take the session forward. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate this opportunity to be able to participate along with my distinguished panelists, co-panelists. I think this is a unique opportunity for us to engage in trying to figure out, not just at a hypothetical level, but maybe at a comparatively practical level, what are the ways and means by which we could build on existing ties between institutions and nations and create new ones. In the Indian context, much before the time of Christ, there were universities in India that attracted scholars from many parts of the world. And I am aware of Nalanda University, when its library and academic records were destroyed, what saved the day for us was that many of our manuscripts and texts had been copied and taken home by scholars who had visited India in earlier times. And so a fair amount of what we had lost in those fires could be recovered. So internationalization brings many of its benefits for all of us. And I'm sure that the combined wisdom of my panelists today will shed light on ways and means by which we could bring about more participation, more activity, more fruitful activity. And I am looking forward to each one of my speakers. I would urge all of us to keep our time limits in mind, and I suggest we speak from between 10 to 12 minutes and no more, and then try and see if we could leave a little time at the end, maybe for discussions, comments, stuff like that. So at this point in time, I would like to start by requesting my friend and colleague, Professor Vidya, to initiate the discussion by giving us her thoughts. Professor Vidya.
Thank you very much, sir, Dr. Dinesh Singh, and thank you, Rajita, and of course, Dr. Pankaj Mittal, for inviting me and requesting me to talk on a topic that is very, very close to my heart, promoting internationalization. I think I eat, live, breathe internationalization, as you all know, and something that I have really lived with, a concept that was conceptualized by my father, Dr. Muzumdar, 50 years ago, when the world wasn't even using the word internationalization, leave alone India. And therefore, I still remember my childhood where we had international students who came and stayed in a house because simply someone lost a passport, someone just felt homesick, and someone just didn't know an English language. And I remember my mother who learned Persian just to accommodate students in the 1970s from Iran, because there were a large number of Iranian students studying in Pune city. And therefore, internationalization is a concept that I really don't consider as an academic concept, but I would say it's more emotional to me. But even then, I will try and see how I can cover this subject of how do you promote internationalization in a university. And if you go back to the definition of what my dear friend Jane Knight and then even Hans David and several others have defined, I think it all means that how do you integrate the global and international dimension in all the functions of the university, which means the purpose, which is the governance of the university, or the services of the university, or the academic and administrative functions of the university. And whenever we discuss internationalization, it's almost synonymous with mobility, students' mobility, which means if your university has a large number of international students, then your university is international. Or if you have a few, if not large, international faculty, and those two from the white skin countries, then your university is international. And I don't know why we pride ourselves to really bring in people from the West, which is Europe and US, and then call our university international, because I think it's more to do with what we can do to those maybe from Africa and West Asia and Southeast Asia and our neighboring countries to promote internationalization. So I'll just take you through what we have done, and I think that will help in understanding the concept of promoting internationalization. I think the key stakeholder in internationalization is the faculty, and the key beneficiary is a student. And therefore, unless your faculty really buy this concept of internationalization, nothing is going to work. No matter how well you set up an international office for the administrative functions, but you have to ensure that the faculty buys this concept of internationalization. When we talk about mobility, is it just the number of students who come to you or the number of countries that are represented in your university important? And I would go one step further to say that internationalization does affect international students who come to your campus, which means they do benefit from coming to a foreign university in a foreign country, because they learn a lot, not just in that university, but also learn in that country. And therefore, when they go back, they definitely go back as individuals who have gained not just knowledge, but even cultural sensitization. But I think it's equally important to have international students in a class for our own Indian students, because I think the diversity element of internationalization is something that we really need to, give importance to. Wonderful, diverse discussions from people from different parts of the globe in a classroom definitely enriches the minds of our own Indian students. I remember that, our School of International Studies has students from Africa, from Nigeria, from Uganda, even from the Gambia, and students from Afghanistan, along with our own Indian students. And the wonderful discussions on international relations that really take place in a classroom where international relations is being taught as an academic program, I think what students get more is from these peers from different countries than really from the teachers who teach international relations. And therefore, I think this diversity of students in a class and the diverse discussions that happen is important. Moving back to faculty, I think faculty, as I said, are the key stakeholders of internationalization. One, because they are the ones who decide what is to be taught in a class. And nowadays, most of our universities have faculty-led programs and faculty-led courses. And therefore, I think faculty who bring in this concept of internationalization will certainly empower our students with the knowledge that is global. And I would say co-teaching or collaborative online international learning are the key, to promote internationalization. Again, an experience of our School of Liberal Arts, where we have a very strong collaboration with DePaul University. And what wonderful co-teaching is being done by a faculty sitting in DePaul and a faculty in India. Of course, time zones do differ, so you have to start your classes very early in the morning. But finding global solutions to local problems through this co-teaching happens. And it's not just the faculty who sit together in a class, but even students sit virtually in a class where students from DePaul University and students from Symbiosis School of Liberal Arts actually sit together and discuss problems to find solutions. So this is a wonderful aspect of how co-teaching can be done. The other is, of course, the collaborative online international learning, and we all know about it. And with this pandemic, when we've all shifted to online education, I think internationalization has been a real catalyst for this online education. And therefore, a lot of collaborative online international learning is happening, whether one likes it or not. But I think our faculty have now found it very exciting, and I'm sure this will continue and will benefit our students. The third, when I look at faculty, is joint research. And if you have a foreign faculty in your staff room, I'm sure the whole, ambience of your staff room changes. Because, our faculty is not really so, I would say, hooked up to research as much as international faculty are. Because I think the whole education system is based on the concept of questioning. And unfortunately, ours is not. And therefore, when you bring in these wonderful young teachers from abroad, and they sit in your staff room and discuss problems of their country and ours, I think a lot of collaborative research begins at least to happen. And I've seen examples even in our School of Geoinformatics or even in our School of Engineering, where faculty from Purdue come very frequently to us. And the wonderful joint research programs that have happened have also initiated some Spark grants. And now most of our engineering faculty is really hooked up to collaborating with foreign faculty to do research. So this is what you can really excite faculty to do when it comes to internationalization. I think internationalization is way beyond mobility of students and faculty. Again, what Jane and Hans David talk about is how do you integrate it into the functions of the university? Again, the academic processes. How do you bring in internationalization into the curriculum? Here again, as I said and discussed already, online education now has really helped in to bring in internationalization in the curriculum. Never ever could we think of having several international faculty teaching in our classes. But now with online education, with platforms like Coursera, edX, this is possible. I mean, you have a professor of Yale teaching your faculty, and you have a professor of MIT teaching your students. And these are wonderful things that have happened in the last 7 to 8 months. And I'm sure our students are definitely benefited. When we talk about internationalization, I move on to the governance. Whether internationalization is one of your mission statements, and whether you like it or not, I think globalization has impacted all of us. And therefore, you have to bring in internationalization into the governance structure, which again means that can your vision and mission statement have internationalization as one of its, one of the parameters. So bringing in internationalization for, for all the stakeholders in your university is important. I will move on to the concept of internationalization at home. And all my friends here, whether it's Francisco or Professor Varghese, and all of us have been discussing this on several occasions. When you talk about student mobility, it's just 2% of the students that are really globally mobile. And now I'm sure the student mobility will still go down further with this pandemic. I'm sure parents don't want to send their children abroad, and with initiatives of the Indian government to have our own Indian students staying here, I think it's all about, bringing this whole concept of internationalization at home on your university campuses. So when I said that 2% of our students are mobile, which means 98% of the students live and stay in our university campuses. How do you bring in internationalization at home to these 98% students? Because you also want these students to become global citizens. You also know that they may be placed in companies that may take them far and wide in any part of the world. So how do you bring in this whole concept of internationalization at home? And it is through your faculty. It is through a lot of things that you do at the level of your governance, and of course, some very palpable things that you even do on your campus. When it comes to services, do you have international offices? I would say, do you have a campus conducive to attract international students? I mean, when Indian government talks about increasing the Indian foreign students from 47,000 presently to maybe 200,000, do you have enough and more universities in India that can accept international students? Or do you have universities in India or colleges in India where international students can find themselves comfortable? And I would say even in a city like Pune, when Pune University attracts a large number of foreign students along with, of course, Symbiosis, how many of the affiliated colleges of Pune University have campuses that are conducive to international students? And when I say campuses conducive to international students, which also means, do they have peers, their own students in the classroom who want to accept students from different countries culturally? Do you have faculty who can even speak good English, leave alone, trying to accept students and trying to understand their language or their problems? Do you have a campus that caters to international cuisine in their cafeterias and canteens? And do you have hostels that would probably have pantries on every floor so that these international students can cook their food instead of eating spicy Indian food in the mess? So you need to have campuses that are conducive to international students. So it's not just about promoting internationalization and attracting foreign students, but how well can you, convert your campuses to make an ecosystem that is favorable to international students. So again, when you talk about services, do you have your Indian students who can actually nurture these international students? International students are actually like kindergarten students, because most of these international students who come to our campuses come from non-English speaking countries. And I remember students from Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, or even Yemen and Oman, who cannot speak English, not even a sentence of English, but they just land in our country. How many of our Indian students are willing to become buddies to these international students? How many of us are willing to teach English as a foreign language to these international students? Do you have English language courses, which are just maybe spoken English courses or English communication courses for these international students? How many of us really, have our faculty who will give remedial coaching to these international students beyond their, hours of teaching in a class? So as I said, right from the governance to the faculty to the Indian students that you have on campus, all of us should be willing to accept these international students. And I won't say it's just for their benefit, but one has to understand it is for our own benefit. Because as very rightly said by Dr. Dinesh Singh, we had these wonderful universities of Takshashila, Nalanda, Vikramshila, who attracted thousands of scholars from far and wide who came to India. And I think when Swami Vivekananda talks about, India would be an education center, in the 21st century, I think it's all about how India would project itself as an education hub for a century. Moving on to what the government has done. And I'm so very glad that this new education policy, the national education policy, has a whole chapter on internationalization. And the UGC has taken upon itself to implement internationalization through a committee on which even I am a member. And I'm very glad that, this has happened for the first time. No other NEP in the past ever discussed internationalization as much as what it is discussed today. So our country is geared up to accept internationalization as a policy. there are several committees that have been formed. On one which I sit is again an equipped committee that was formed, which is on quality parameters, again, where internationalization is one of the parameters, which also discusses quality. AIU, I mean, I would really appreciate what work my dear friend Pankaj has done in setting up the Indian Network for International Education, because collaboration is the key word now. When you talk about international initiatives or faculty mobility, student mobility, nothing can happen without collaboration. So unless you have a very strong network of our own universities and some of the foreign universities, as a policy document that Pankaj is trying to create, internationalization cannot see its way forward. So I'm very happy with this. EdSil, a PSU under the Ministry of Education, which is promoting internationalization by attracting students from almost 30 target countries, and the wonderful initiatives of giving scholarships to these students coming from developing countries is one more great initiative that has been done by the government. So a lot of things that are being done by the government to increase the foreign student strength from 47,000 to maybe 200,000 in the next 5 to 10 years, that would be commendable. But unless our universities, have this whole concept of, treating these international students as our own, trying to understand the whole concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is one family, no matter what we do, unless we change our mindset towards interculturalism, which is a new concept that has been discussed world over, I'm sure internationalization will not find its way. I'll just end my talk with a shlok from the Maha Upanishad, which is the motto of our own university, Symbiosis, which my father established 50 years ago. The shlok goes, and all of us know about it. Ayam nija proveti ganana laguchetasam udara charita nam tu vasudhaiva kutumbakam. For my foreign friends who are here, it means those who discriminate, this is mine and that is yours. He is my friend and he is a stranger, are people with very petty minds. People with noble and broad minds embrace the entire world as one family. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Vidya. You brought many pertinent points into focus. I think one of the most important points that you mentioned right at the beginning was this business of getting faculty to participate. Internationalization doesn't happen easily unless faculty are willing to facilitate these things and sort of embrace all aspects of internationalization. The other thing that I liked about what you said was this business of when international students get together, they probably learn much more from each other than they do necessarily in the classrooms. And that peer learning is a huge advantage. And believe me, I mean, I've noticed this firsthand. So thank you very much for these valid points that you brought into focus. And I'm sure we will have something to say at the end when we try and discuss. While summarizing, I'm delighted now to invite my other panelists on this distinguished group of people, Professor Francis Marmolejo. Sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. And I will try to share a screen. Please tell me at convenience if the screen is being shared.
We can see it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Singh. And it is an honor participating at today's session with such a list of distinguished colleagues and especially, all of them good friends. And the idea is to talk about, again, the idea of promoting internationalization. And I will base my comments on the perspectives that I acquired while I was working in India, but also the fact that I have been observing and working in international education, I would say mostly all my professional life. So I think maybe following up a little bit on what Vidya already indicated, I think it is important for all of us to question if really internationalization of higher education is important. And there are many signals about that. First of all, it is very clear that, when we talk about the skills that are going to be needed, not in the future, but today, for graduates of higher education, there is no doubt that for all of them, the internationalization becomes a significant tool towards enabling students with those sort of capacities that are going to be needed, again, in order for them to become successful professionals. At the same time, another reality is that globally, there is a furious competition for talent. And that is going to be also be a significant factor in the after COVID pandemic time. So that competition for talent is a reality. So the question is, do we have our students being prepared not only to compete, but also to face competition, which is, I think it is important to keep in mind that. So the question is if all of this requires preparing students with global awareness and with competitiveness, but also as students and professionals of the future, which also are also committed to the community that they belong to. Secondly, do we need to strengthen the cooperation among higher education institutions, among themselves, but also with the communities in which they are located? Do we need to implement mechanisms for better understanding, for better awareness and respect among higher education institutions globally? And of course, if we need to innovate, if we need to internationalize our higher education. And I'm sure that the answer of the Vice Chancellors participating at this conference is yes. We need to prepare students better. We need to strengthen our cooperation. We need to implement ways to collaborate more effectively. And of course, consequently, we need to internationalize our higher education institutions. And of course, internationalization is a concept that is not very clearly understood. As Vidya was referring to, many times it is just referred to student mobility, but it's much more than that. Some of the typical interpretations already were mentioned by her. Mobility is being seen as equivalent to internationalization. Rankings now in today's world, it is also being seen as an equivalent to good quality, and it's an equivalent to good international quality. Signing of MOUs is also being seen as a indicator of international activity. Always I joke by saying that the number of MOUs that a university has signed is inversely proportional to the degree of internationalization of the university. And also many times internationalization is being seen as something that a new vice chancellor comes on board and decides that now the university is international by decree. It is much more than that. Many times also internationalization is being seen as a source of additional revenues. And I think we need to go beyond those misconceptions about what internationalization is or is not. Why? Well, because if we focus our work in internationalization just in mobility of students, let's keep in mind that globally, mobile students represent only 1% of the global enrollment in higher education. So are we going to be concentrating in the 1%? What about the 99%? What about ways to provide the 99% with the global dimension that is so important for the future? And that's why ideas such as internationalization at home that Vidya already had indicated are so important as we envision a new higher education for the world. So a question for all of you is, what is the approach that you are thinking about when you think about internationalization? Is symbolic because you just want to have some kind of flavor of international in your institution? Is traditional because you are just focusing on student mobility or in a few MOUs or in a few faculty members who have some international collaboration? Is comprehensive because you are really trying to provide the internationalization dimension to all your students in your institution? Is disruptive because you are trying to revolutionize and change dramatically the status quo? I think it is important to question yourself about that as a way to respond. What is the type of actions that you want to put in place? And of course, in all of that, there is a new factor, which is the pandemic. And the pandemic became something unexpected with significant consequences in all our life. Of course, it has significant implications in the short term. There is an economic retrenchment in the world. There is higher dropout rates of students of higher education all over the world. There are few, if not none, international students in our campuses today. And of course, still many institutions don't know exactly how the new normal is going to be. And of course, the global trend is affecting all, including higher education. Look at this chart showing the dramatic reduction on employees in higher education in the United States because the crisis. The trend of more mobile students in the world certainly also has been stopped. Let me give you the case of Australia. Students from India consider Australia as a very important destination, but Australia suddenly became a no option considering the risk, the situation of the pandemic. And for many institutions, which really rely on international students, as you can see on this chart, in some of them, up to 40% of their enrollment is made up of international students, many of them from India. Of course, the implications of losing suddenly the international students becomes a significant financial crunch for those institutions, many of them which are even posed to close entire campus because they don't have that feed of international students that they were relying on. Some of the potential consequences of the crisis is, of course, that as student enrollment international diminishes, there are many multiplier effects. Faculty members in some of the most important universities in the world who used to rely on international students to do the research no longer have those researchers that come from other parts of the world. There are significant financial implications. And of course, there is the risk of diminishing the interest on international engagement as institutions are facing with the challenges of COVID in the domestic array. And of course, offices of international education have the risk of becoming more far, I might say, from the center of the decision making or of the institutions. So we like it or not, it is a new normal. And it is a new normal in which the only reality is that uncertainty still is ahead. So if we think a little bit about what is next for us in internationalization, first of all, let's keep in mind the significant potential that India has in the global landscape of higher education. While China is starting to decline in the number of students in higher education, India is just ready to go up. India is having, the youngest cohort of students or people in the world that can become productive citizens if they have the opportunity of higher education. The shifting distribution of the global stock of people with higher education shows clearly that India will become a significant contributor, if you want, to people with higher education studies globally. So I used to say when I was living in India that if we are concerned about the future, we should take a look to what happened in India. So India represents the opportunity for a better future if its higher education system properly aligns to what is needed not only in India, but also based on what we see in terms of international trends. And of course, the new national education policy provides a number of hints about ways in which higher education can align more effectively to the needs of society, can become a better promoter of a better India, which is going to be beneficial to the rest of the world. But of course, that requires also, again, aligning more effectively the internationalization agenda into that. So I think it is time to question some of the dogmas, some of the assumptions that we had about higher education and about internationalization. Is internationalization only about attracting students? Are rankings as important as we think? What is education about? It's about preparing for people for jobs or preparing for life and citizenship. And don't forget that we are living today in the largest social experiment in our timeline. And in this social experiment in which we are, higher education can do much better. So it is a renewed landscape for higher education and for internationalization. And there are areas of opportunity for this disruptive education that I was talking about. We can have better articulation of our higher education systems, internally and externally. We can figure out ways to recognize more effectively what students learn outside of the classroom. We need to really establish more flexible higher education institutions. We need to take advantage of what we learned about remote teaching and learning in order to develop more effective blended learning programs. We need to connect, and we can connect more effectively to the community in which we are located, both locally and internationally. We need to find ways to have our students becoming the drivers of their own learning. And of course, we can establish mechanisms for virtual mobility, for internationalization at home that will benefit not only that 1 or 2% of our students, but all our students in our higher education institutions. So in terms of internationalization, there are different options that they can be considered. Programs of internationalization at home, virtual mobility, 0 semester abroad, micro campuses in collaboration with other institutions, co-teaching as a mirror teaching with peers from other parts of the world, innovative research collaboration, renewing our collaboration with other institutions, and of course, finding a ways for the internationalization agenda being part of the efforts towards the redesign of the academic programs. So there are things we can do and we should do if we really want to embrace this new concept of internationalization. We need to establish a strategic plan for internationalization that recognizes these new realities. And of course, we need to redefine how do we organize in order to cope with that. As Vidya was indicating before, is the campus really ready for international students? Is the campus really ready to provide the international dimension to our local students? And of course, that means also to define where the incentives should be. So I will finalize by saying that this is a unique opportunity to mainstream internationalization into the core work of our higher education institutions. And we can do that if we find ways in which we embed the international education value, not only in a few disciplines, which are the usual suspects, but in all disciplines in our higher education institutions. And of course, that means that we need to get out of our comfort zone. We need to challenge ourselves in order to really recognize that international is relevant because it is relevant locally. And that internationalization is not a goal to be achieved, but is mostly a means towards a much more relevant higher education institutions. And of course, that requires to think that we are the drivers, if you want, of our car in order for us to be the ones who make those decisions. So this is a unique momentum in which it looks like the planets, if you want, have aligned. And of course, there are no magic solutions. Each of your institutions should find their own way to try to tackle this opportunity that represents a renewed internationalization efforts in our higher education institutions. It is not simple, but of course, but there are significant lessons to be learned. And of course, in the case of India, there are important examples to be taken advantage of. The case of Symbiosis University is a very good one to take a look at. And the university always has been very open to try to share their expertise with other institutions. And of course, governments must act, but higher education institutions need to embrace the change themselves. So let me finish by asking you a question. Is your university just reacting to what is happening, emulating, or your university is proactively engaged in fostering change? What it will be risky is not to do anything. What it will be risky will be just to wait until the storm passes, and then assuming that we will go back to business as usual. Business as usual no longer will be as it used to be. As Paul Valéry said, the future, like everything else, is no longer quite what it used to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Francisco. It's an admirable presentation. You brought forth so many points. Essentially, you've covered the entire gamut of features that would comprise internationalization of education, and I think it's redundant for me to say anything, but I really appreciate the fact that it's not a goal in itself. That's what you said about internationalization. That's what institutions and nations must realize. It's much more than that. It's far deeper. And this business of, student-led learning, I think you've hit the nail on the head on that matter. Institutions must recognize this. The sooner they do that, the better it's going to be. Thank you once again. I think you've covered so many interesting points, and sort of my head is full of all kinds of thoughts that have been stimulated by what you just said. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
It's
my delight now to invite Professor N.V. Varghese.
Thank you, Chairman. I thank Association of Indian Universities, Dr. Pankaj Mittal, and also Shri University for inviting me to participate in this panel discussion. It is very difficult to follow two great speakers like Francisco and Dr. Vidya. Let me try to talk about internationalization as a footnote to or some complementarities that they have talked about it. My first point is that the point of departure today in India, when we talk about internationalization, is that there is a felt feeling by the government and by the public authorities in India to play a widening or expanding global role. And higher education and education is seen as one of the means to achieve that goal. So that will be mainly my point of departure, if I can call it as a point of departure. Because today, as Dr. Vidya very rightly pointed out, 1968 policy and 1986 policy did not talk about internationalization. This is the first policy that talked about internationalization. That also reflects the changing role of India, changing global presence of India in the globe itself. I feel that when we talk about internationalization, it is important to see, as Professor Dinesh Singh initially made in his initial remarks, that there are different ways in which it is to be tried to look into the ancient history that he talked about. Perhaps till the medieval period, it was the search for knowledge that led internationalization, that brought people together in the context of internationalization. So one was not talking about internationalization at home and internationalization abroad at that point of time. The second stage that we talk about internationalization is that in the post-colonial period in the developing countries and the reconstruction period, the post-World War period in Europe, one was talking about higher education linking with the national development. Again, it was national internationalization for national development. The third stage of internationalization that we talk about is the stage when we say that in the context of globalization, internationalization for the global market. And when we talk about the third stage, what one also finds is that it becomes a market mediated process, not a public sector mediated process. It is not a state or government policy decided process, but more of a market mediated process in the context of globalization. Today, when we talk about God's framework and we talk the internationalization in terms of mobility, cross-border mobility, mobility of students, mobility of curriculum, mobility of courses, mobility of institutions, and mobility of teachers, these four forms of mobility, which forms the basis. We are talking about mostly about a market mediated, and we try to see that education is seen as a commodity to be traded across borders, So there is a substantial difference in that. As Francisco very rightly pointed out, the post-COVID, the fourth situation is something very different. Internationalization, it is neither at home, it is not internationalization abroad, but it is in between. Even the international students who studied abroad are sitting at home and trying to do it online courses, So there are issues related to that. I think if you look at little more objectively, India was a beneficiary of internationalization, the earlier phases, because our great institutions like IITs or IIMs and many other technological institutions were built with international collaborations. Secondly, many of our Indian teachers in the initial stages were trained abroad, and we had been benefited very much from that. Even today, the top ranking institutions in India, either we use NIRF or we use the global rankings. What one finds is that if you go to a good top ranking institution, you'll find that a good share of the faculty members are trained abroad. So internationalization has played that role. And if you look at the publications of many faculty members, we find that a large number of publications in the international journal is also through collaborative research that has been done, So it has been a beneficiary. India has been a beneficiary of this process, and therefore one finds that internationalization is a good effort, it's a nice effort, and it is an effort to see that our higher education is designed and redesigned in a much better way, and quality emphasis is almost completed or is satisfied when we have more international collaborations. However, I would like to make a distinction between when India is talking about internationalization and the world is talking about internationalization. I think in most cases, in the context of globalization and post-globalization world, when one is talking about internationalization, it is more a revenue generating aspect of internationalization that is emphasized by most of the states or most of the countries. Whereas India is not talking about the revenue generation motivation or revenue generation as the primary motivation for internationalization or the process that we are talking about. Why I'm making this point? It is because one finds that if you see the Indian students going abroad, I'm not getting into internationalization at home because Dr. Vidya has already spent time on that, and that is very important. Unless we internationalize our curriculum, we will not be able to attract students from other countries to India. That I'll come to it later. But anyway, that is a point that is very well described by Dr. Vidya. I think there are two modes that we find that even Indian students going abroad. One is that high cost and high return model. That is the model that is operating because a large number of students, more than 300,000 students go abroad, and a substantial share of these students are going to United States, United Kingdom, and Australia. They together account for more than 70% of the Indian students going abroad. Of course, the relative share has declined. If United States had around 75 to 80%, attracted 75 to 80% of the Indian students in the late 80s and 90s, now it is only 44 to 45%. The relative share has declined, but not the number. However, these are the routes, especially to USA, UK, and Australia are the routes where we find high cost and high return. So people are ready to invest. Then there is another route for international students, students going abroad from India, international students in that sense, is that low cost and low return or middle cost and middle return. That is these are the students who are mostly going to China. So for example, those students who are going to China for medical education, and they do not get the returns the way that a graduate from UK or USA university is getting. And some of them find struggling because, when they come back to India, we realize that we do not accept even the degrees awarded by the Chinese medical institutions, and they had to appear for another test to qualify to practice. And you find that the pass percentage when these students completed graduation or medical graduation from China, when they come to India and appear for the examinations, for qualifying examinations, it is less than 15%, sometimes 10%, sometimes 12%, sometimes 13%. As a result of that, the returns that they get from this one. So these are two models that we find. What is the motivation for students coming to India? When India is saying that we'll make it as an educational hub and we will try to attract large number of students, and some of the documents brought out by India in 2019-20 indicated that by the year 2024, we'll be having around 500,000 foreign students in India. And India is ready to give fellowship to the students, to attract the students. So that is the point that I said, that it is not a commercially motivated, it is not a market mediated, it is not under the wings of the Guards framework that India is operationalizing issues related to internationalization of education. So you find that this is a low return, and also it is not only low return, it is a low cost and low return for the students coming to India. Mostly the students are coming from South Asia and also from the African countries. They consider that the educational system or education universities in India are much better than what you find in other countries, in the developing countries. This is an attraction. But unfortunately, India has not changed its attitudes legally. And I am not talking about the type of attitude changes Dr. Vidya mentioned about it, even legally. How many students who come to India for studies will be permitted to work, employed here in India? This is one of the issues. When Indian students are going abroad to many countries, what we are looking for is the post-study visa and employment opportunities. But India is not ready to recruit so many people who are coming and studying and graduating from India to be employed here. So therefore, I feel that if we want to talk about India as an education hub, there is a need to look more closely into not only the educational rules and regulations, but also immigration rules and regulations, employment rules and regulations, and the salary structure, etc., whereby we are in a position to give little more incentives and hope for the people who are ready to come and invest their time and get a degree from India. The new education policy certainly makes a change towards welcoming foreign institutions, which was something that was not permitted. Out of the 4 modes of mobility, cross-border mobility, we permitted program mobility through MOOCs, and India is the second largest country which is having the largest number of students enrolled in MOOCs courses. And you have permitted faculty or Indian faculty used to go abroad. Students' mobility was permitted, but institutional mobility was not permitted. So what is new in the new education policy is also a process by which we will be permitting foreign institutions to come and start branch campuses. And therefore, I feel that how these branch campuses will be promoted, what are the rules and regulations that will permit these branch campuses to flourish in India, and what are the arrangements or regulatory systems that will be created for these institutions to continue to operate in India, especially repatriation of profits or surplus that is produced by the institution will be a very debatable and a controversial issue. It all depends upon how do we try to make these changes. And also, we have made certain changes, the changes in terms of the global convention. UNESCO has passed resolutions regarding global convention of degrees or qualifications, recognition of qualifications in 2019 October. And we have the Tokyo Convention in 2012 on the same subject. India has not ratified this. So it depends upon how India will, or to what extent India will ratify this. Similarly, it is also important to see that National Higher Education Qualification Framework, we have a National Skill Qualification Framework. We have not yet developed a National Higher Education Qualification Framework. The new policy talks about it, but we have been talking about it for the last 7 or 8 years, but it has not come to a complete or a concrete shape. It has not taken a concrete shape yet. And finally, I will say that the arrangements for credit transfer. Now, the Ministry of Education, as a follow-up to the policy, has established a high-level, national-level committee on credit transfer. And NIEPA is the secretary, and I am a member secretary of that committee. And I think the credit transfer facilities between different institutions within the country and between institutions in India and abroad, these are the contributory factors that will make or that will facilitate internationalization and mobility pattern very well and in a much better way. So let me end by saying that to what extent India will be able to play a global role, and to what extent India is ready to invest, not in terms of money alone, invest in both politically and socially, and how we will be in a position to take the institutions along with us to have more international students and to have internationalization or facilitate internationalization of curriculum to improve the quality of domestic education and also to attract foreign students to India will decide the nature and the design of internationalization that India will follow in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Varghese. I must compliment you on many things. Like the 2 previous distinguished panelists, you have brought your own perspective to the discussion at hand, and you have brought in, no matter how lofty our ideas and ideals and ambitions and goals, unless we look at the practical dimensions, the nitty-gritty realities of the situation, nothing is ever going to happen. And you brought it with much focus and much wisdom, all the practical aspects of what this entails. And I believe that since you are secretary of the committee that will facilitate so many things, including credit transfer, much good is likely to happen through efforts like yours. And thank you for bringing this into focus here. I must also compliment you that you timed yourself with mathematical precision, much that we should learn on these matters. Thank you very much. I now have the pleasure of inviting Mr. Anthony Miranda. He is a diplomat, as I can gather, and he will lend his own perspective to the discussion at hand. And we are eagerly looking forward to what you have to say, sir. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for that introduction earlier. It is such a pleasure for me to join all of you today on this very timely and important conversation on the internationalization of higher education. I just want to quickly thank the Government of India and the Association of Indian Universities for organizing this conference. And of course, in particular, I'd like to extend my sincere thanks and gratitude to the Association of Indian Universities President, Dr. Tej Partap, and its Secretary General, Dr. Pankaj Mittal, for inviting me as a representative of the US mission to India to join you. We at the mission have hosted a series of conferences on internationalization over the summer with Drs. Partap and Mittal. So it's great to see good friends again, and albeit virtually, of course, and to discuss this topic, which is really important to the US-India relationship. And I also just want to acknowledge the great presentations by the three earliest panelists. I was taking notes during all three presentations. They were really quite excellent. So kudos to the three of you. Very, very informative and interesting. You know, as a US diplomat, I've had the privilege to devote my career in government service to accomplishing US foreign policy goals through engaging with foreign audiences and promoting US higher education, whether by encouraging foreign students to consider the United States as a destination in which to study, showcasing US institutions, collaborative partnerships with foreign counterparts, or leveraging the numerous US government-funded exchange programs. These are all significant contributors to the strength and the depth of the US-India people-to-people ties. You know, hundreds of thousands of Indians, I mean, dare I say millions, have studied in the United States in the last 60 years. In the last 10 years alone, the number of Indian students in the US has doubled. And when you think about the 1 million international students that we host in the United States every year, 1 in 5 is from India. And we certainly expect that number to grow in the future, you know, once we can successfully, collaboratively put the COVID pandemic behind us. Why do we seek international students? This has come up in some of my co-panelists' conversations as well. You know, foreign students bring an unparalleled international perspective to US campuses. It's a perspective that enriches American students immeasurably. And of course, we like to think too that the foreign students who are pursuing education in the United States receive a similar benefit. We regularly meet US educated Indians in boardrooms, in labs, in ministries, in think tanks, of course, in universities as well. And they're in leadership positions across all sectors of Indian society. And they share at home the perspectives they gained while abroad. Maybe they're able to see outside the box and see new solutions to age-old problems. That impact of these people-to-people ties over time is immeasurable and crucial to the US-India relationship. You know, how we define our values or form our ideas about people from another country, of course, it's a multi-layered and complicated process. Traditional and social media may play a role, but we gain our strongest impressions through personal experience. And this is, I think, what happens when, Indian students experience campus life at US universities. Attending classes and study groups, working on joint projects. Of course, these are all crucial components of the university experience, but so are the social aspects, whether it's living in a dorm, sitting at a new table in a dining hall, joining a club or an interest group. Indian students gain new appreciation for what it means to be Indian while learning to be citizens of the world. And it's interesting, some of the initial slides that Professor Marmolejo showed kind of went through all the different sort of benefits that study abroad can bring. And of course, for many Americans, certainly for those who don't have Indian ancestry, the personal interactions that they have with Indian students while at university stay with them for the rest of their lives. And they influence how they see India as a country. So in that regard, sending Indians to study in one country is really one of the best forms of diplomacy, of public diplomacy. Educational exchange is really a foundational component to our people-to-people relationship with India. And we're working very hard to build on it to the benefit of both of our countries. Just last year, the Fulbright program, which is the State Department's flagship educational exchange, celebrated its 70th year in India. And since 2008, the program in India has actually been known as the Fulbright Nehru program, thanks to the Indian government's equal contribution to that of the United States to fund these scholarships. The State Department also invests in a global network of educational advisors through Education USA. And that offers low-cost or free advising or resources to help Indian students find and fund the right program for their studies in the United States. We actually launched 2 years ago an Education USA app, and we recently opened a new Education USA Center in Hyderabad, which brings up to the total number of advising centers in India up to 8. Now, I talked about, internationalization in the higher ed arena as an example that helps people-to-people ties. It equally, if not more important, plays a very important role in a country's economic growth. A strong and prosperous India is not only in India's interests, but it's in the interests of the United States, the region, and the world. And one of the thoughts that I hope I could leave you with is that the United States wants to be a major player in India's economic growth and development, and education is really an important part of that. It's interesting, Dr. Varghese mentioned, and I think this also came up in Dr. Marmolejo's presentation, about sometimes we think too much in terms of internationalization, in terms of like maybe the fees that the students bring to the host country they may be studying in. And that's why I thought it was really important for me to lead with the example that I gave about the people-to-people ties, because even though it's true, Indian students coming to the United States for higher education bring $8 billion to the US economy. Equally important is all of the ties that are formed with Americans while there. Now, I wanted to share with you that we have funded a $2 million program called Partnership 2020. And it supports actually 15 partnerships and collaborations between Indian and US institutions. You can actually check out the website. It's partnership2020.org. And you'll see there an interactive map of agreements between Indian and US institutions by state. So you can see, for example, how many joint research projects exist between Illinois and West Bengal, as an example. We're working with the Ministry of Education, AIU, the University Grants Commission, and many others to explore ways to encourage even more partnerships. And of course, we also engage with Indian universities who are looking to grow their international student numbers. And this, sort of reminds me of the presentation that we started off with by Dr. Vidya, because she really made some very great points about, internationalization and the questions that, because of course, it wouldn't be a good panel discussion among chancellors and university professors if there weren't some really good questions being asked for us all to consider, right? Some of the questions that were posed, about what's the motivation for students to come to India, as Professor Varghese was saying, and what about their employment? These are all the great questions that Indian universities should be asking themselves. The new national education policy, that the Indian government released over the summer promotes internationalization. And, actually, one of Professor Marmolejo's slides talked about this, sort of the need for, a strategic plan of internationalization. So this is definitely a step in that direction, right? US colleges and universities want to develop partnerships with Indian institutions that are mutually beneficial and that makes sense in the context of each institution's long-term strategy. So, we in the US government and those at US higher education institutions are really looking forward to understanding how the legislative framework contemplated by the NEP will facilitate more of these opportunities for collaboration and partnership. And really all of these vice chancellors that are attending this panel today, you are going to make the NEP a reality. And you're going to do that really by leveraging, whether it's, a nascent relationship that you have with a US professor or institution, or one that's already established, but it's leveraging, or even the alumni that you might have, it's leveraging those relationships to help make the NEP a reality. We've certainly heard from many US universities about their interest in increasing partnerships with Indian institutions. And they see what I have the pleasure of living every day, which is a vibrant India that is dynamic, has incredible potential, and that is taking its place as a leader in the region and in the world. And all of you who are tuning into this panel are helping to realize a better future for all of the students who are attending your institutions. And I just want to applaud your efforts. Please know that you have a partner with the US mission to India. And I hope that we stay in touch to continue our common goal to improve the ties between both of our countries. So with that, thank you very much. And I'll turn it over back to you, Professor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Miranda. I don't know what to say. I think you brought the icing on the cake. And, I feel like this junior judge on a multi-judge bench where the senior judges have all pronounced judgment. And my task is really easy. All I'm required to say is I concur and end the discussion and matter rests. But I know that Dr. Pankaj Mittal will never forgive me if I do so. So I'll try and add my penny's worth. But Mr. Miranda, I think you brought in all the other aspects that were missing from the inputs from the other three distinguished panelists. And thank you for doing that. And there's a personal reason why I appreciate what you had to say, because many of my own experiments in education have been connected with the United States. And this is in the context of internationalization. So it was heartening to see that you represent the views of your nation in a manner that suits very much what I have always asked for or hoped for. And maybe in what I have to say now, I may be able to lend a little perspective to what you had to say. So thank you very much. Let me summarize and sort of add, as I said, my penny's worth, and be patient with me. I'll try and finish as quickly as I can because there isn't much to add. But, I'm a mathematician really, and education has been a kind of thing that has accompanied my journey as a mathematician, and I can never sort of get out of my role as a mathematician. And I like to define things very clearly, as mathematicians do, so that we are very clear about what we are talking. And in this context, I'd like to put the definition of education very clearly so that we can understand what internationalization of education would mean. And I have a very simple definition. To my mind, education is a very personal thing. It's a personal journey for each individual to discover his or her own inner self. I believe each one of us is born with a drumbeat, the drumbeat of the soul. The Sanskrit word for that is antardhvani. And if you can discover that drumbeat and then march in the real world in harmony with that drumbeat, you begin to get educated. And you can do this at the individual level or create systems and institutions and ideas and programs that allow this to happen at a mass level. But to my mind, that is the only true way in which you can create good education. So the challenge is to create an environment or programs or activities that engender, that nurture, that encourage activities which allow students, individuals, the youth, whosoever wishes to participate, to delve within and discover the drumbeat. And how does one do that? That's the challenge. But you will notice in my definition, there is no talk of a formal institution or a degree. And let me illustrate that. Like any mathematician, when we give a definition, we wish to give some illustrations as examples to make the idea clear. And I hark back to the time when Mahatma Gandhi was in his formative years. He was at that time in South Africa in his 30s. And he came upon a book written by John Ruskin, which he read on a train journey from Johannesburg to Durban. And that book transformed Mahatma Gandhi's life. He found his drumbeat within. He writes in his own words that as I alighted from the train, I had finished the book and I had found my mission in life. I knew what I had to do. What was it? Well, Ruskin was part of an American group of intellectuals of the 19th century known as members of the Concord movement in the state of Massachusetts. They were also known as transcendentalists, the great thinkers of the 19th century, Emerson, Thoreau, Ruskin, Carlyle, all of them. And because I've been a great acolyte of Mahatma Gandhi, I've tried to understand what were his ideas and why. And incidentally, Gandhi had no university degree, no qualification, but he became father of the nation and was guru to so many. So I delved into the transcendentalists, and guess what? The transcendentalists I found, particularly beginning with Emerson, were deeply influenced by Upanishadic thought of ancient times of India, dating back to the times before Jesus Christ. So what is it? And incidentally, Gandhi's own thoughts affected a delegation of blacks that visited him when he was here fighting for independence. We were on the verge of being granted independence. He told that delegation of American blacks that it may well be that the message of nonviolence, such a great idea, such a great thing for education, may go to the West through the American blacks. And there was a gentleman in that delegation who was a teacher at this institution where Martin Luther King was a student. And when he went back, he exposed his students to Gandhi's ideas of nonviolence, and Martin Luther King was then influenced. Now, what am I trying to tell you? Here is this great thing that was really embodied first in the Upanishads, these great ideas and traditions of intellectual thought, but at a practical level. The Upanishads are full of practical wisdom. And they break the tyranny of time and geography and cross the continents over centuries, affect those American thinkers, the great ones. Emerson was an outstanding thinker and man of action. So was Thoreau. Thoreau also influenced Mahatma Gandhi deeply. And then they go and come back and influence Gandhi. Then they go back and influence Martin Luther King. And then they come and influence Nelson Mandela. Do you see this business of great ideas? These are things that are educating people, continents, political movements, and institutions. So my point is, the first thing we must all focus on is to create great ideas and thoughts, whether you do that in a formal institution, or you do that in a system, or you do that independently, but that's where the focus must be. And universities are very well placed to recognize great thoughts in society, to pick them, create learning programs out of them. Why? Not because we wish to degrees or create formal credit programs. No, because we wish to inspire the young, because we wish to nurture them to find their drumbeats and contribute meaningfully to society. And now let me come to some practical experiments that I have indulged in my own little journey in the realm of education in life. So, you know, about a little than 15 years ago, I motivated a very distinguished American mathematician, a good friend of mine, take an online class on a very advanced but relevant, interesting concept of mathematics. Teaching that in face-to-face in his own university at the same time. And he agreed to do that. And I advertised all over the nation, and I had students, people from society enrolling from different parts of India, getting in their homes in the evenings. Hear me? I'm sorry, I think I lost connection.
Yes.
You are back. You are back.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Now you are audible.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. Okay. So this mathematician did that for a whole semester. And at the end, among other things that he told me, he said that this was one of the most productive programs of learning that he had ever taken part in. And there were no formal degrees, no credit, nothing. This was just an exercise to test technology and good ideas. I am forever telling you, unless you have good ideas, great thoughts, nothing is going to happen. Technology is a great enabler. And at this point in time, I feel that the less we have of the formal classroom, I'm not asking anyone to a classroom, but the less we have of this classroom-led learning and more of experiential learning in the world in a group theoretic fashion, through projects, etc., the better it will be. And let me illustrate. So if you wish to do something that will bring about international attention, cooperation, collaboration, each one of us, no matter as an individual or as an institution or as a nation, must seek to do something that is unique and different, and must keep in mind that it should enable people to delve within and discover themselves. So at the University of Delhi, when we launched our undergraduate programs, when I was its Vice Chancellor, we indulged in many activities which now are embodied in the national education policy. And that is why I will sort of repeat some of them. So amongst the things that we were running, each year, we would rent a whole train from the Indian Railways and convert it into a college on wheels. It was known as the Dawn of Knowledge Express or Gyanoday Express. 1,000 students would ride on that train. We would decide the journey in advance. The students would be selected based on how projects would be conducted by them in groups. Each student had access to high technology, so on and so forth. And journeys ran for 15 to 20 days. And we ran a journey each of my 5 years as Vice Chancellor. What am I trying to say? In my third year, by now it had reached into many countries, and we had students coming in United Kingdom and from the United States journeys, not awarding any formal credit to students from abroad, but came, they participated, and they learned much. We also did something else. I had inculcated my undergraduates, and this is the other thing I would like to say. All international activities in the realm of education seem to be focused at the level of research or graduate students. The sooner we focus on undergraduates, the better it will be for all of us. I urge all the participants to think carefully about this, particularly in India. So at the university, we had launched through a full credit program what are called innovation activities for undergraduates, where they were again encouraged to work in groups on problems, needs, and challenges of the world around them in a transdisciplinary fashion. And many institutions took part, King's College, University of Edinburgh, and finally we were visited by the president of the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, who also wanted her students to take part in these activities. And it was, to my mind, true internationalization. We didn't really worry about credit transfer, etc. Of course, there will be issues. But I noticed that the more you look at them and tackle them at your local level, the easier it is, the better it is. So I would urge institutions to think along these lines, to be quick on their feet, to be receptive to new ideas, and to understand that why do we indulge in this practice of education? To allow minds, especially the young, to discover their true inner drumbeats and then to contribute in meaningful fashion to society. And I call this a sort of redefining of education. There are, of course, so many other things we could talk about. In many ways, formal education is diminishing fair amount. And if you may have heard Elon Musk say recently that his children educated themselves largely through YouTube and such other platforms. And believe me, these are great things on education. I run a very successful semester credit program which I conducted personally, called Unleashing the Power of the Web as a Knowledge Device. And believe me, the web has become a huge knowledge device, but of course, there are many things that must supplement and complement all this. But at this point in time, I would like to rest my thoughts. We have about 5 minutes left, and I would urge the organizers to ask the audience if they have any questions to ask of the distinguished panelists. Maybe some more wisdom could be brought to bear. Thank you.
Have 5 minutes. So if anybody has any questions,
I'm sure the panelists would be happy to answer questions. So I invite questions from the audience.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Satyanarayana from C.V. Raman Global University, Vice Chancellor of the university. It's been wonderful listening to all of you. I mean, Professor Dinesh Singh, Professor Vidya, Professor Varghese, and also our experts from abroad. So my question is actually to Mr. Anthony, actually from the US Embassy or the US Mission. So I think the science as a tool for diplomacy was one of the initiatives under which, I mean, more science and higher education, science and technology initiatives were started and more officers were created, because we're talking of internationalization across the globe. And I also happen to have some privilege of being in the US Embassy as FSN 11, 12 or whatever for about 3 years. And also it was at that time, again, between Indo-US relationship, I mean, any Indian academic or researcher could get within 10 days a visa, or I mean, this innovation grants were opened up, dual technology embargoes were removed. But then at some point, this office merged with economics. So does it mean this international collaboration in science and technology and higher education got reduced, that it became part of the economics division rather than having as a minister counselor exclusively for science and technology? Or is it that, I mean, it was more profitable? Or actually, what are the new initiatives to truly enable, because we all are more aspirational. University.
Hello, can I ask a question?
Well, okay. We'll take 2 questions and then I'll ask the panelists to answer. The first one was from Mr. Miranda. Who are you addressing, sir?
I am Mahendra Reddy. Vice Chancellor, ICFA University in Hyderabad. Can I ask my question?
Yes, please go ahead.
I just like to make one observation and one question. I want to tell you that at ICFA University in Hyderabad, we have a PhD program where we have signed MOUs with American universities, British universities, and Australian universities, where we send our students after their qualifying examination for a year abroad. They had that exposure to teaching and research. In an international context, came back, subjects and IITs and all. The second question which I have is, as Professor Varghese mentioned, the idea of inviting the top 100 universities in the world to come to India is excellent. What I would like to say is it will not only give opportunity to the students in India to educate themselves in those universities and improve competition in the country, but also help students from Southeast Asia, West Asia, African countries to come to India. And that the internationalization will improve, it will benefit India, and it will be.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Reddy. Because we're about to run out of time, I would like the last minute to be given to Mr. Miranda to answer the first question.
Thank you so much, and thanks for the question. In some ways, I think your question about sort of the organizational structure within the U.S. mission just highlights how important we think collaboration in the fields of science and technology are. The fact that multiple sections within our mission all want a piece of the action. We have, for example, the U.S.-India Science and Technology Endowment Fund. There are a number of STEM-related Fulbright exchanges as well. And even, I'm from sort of our foreign ministry, right, the State Department, but even the Foreign Commercial Service, which is part of our Commerce Department, is involved in promoting U.S. higher education. Even from that sort of financial aspect that we talked about a little bit earlier about sort of the $8 billion contribution to the U.S. economy that Indian students bring. So it's such an important topic and such a cross-cutting topic, interdisciplinary, you could almost say, that you have lots of different elements of the U.S. government involved. Thanks for that question.
Thank you, Mr. Miranda. We're about to finish our session, and I'd just like to lend a little more perspective to this economic thing that you mentioned. A few years ago, when Boris Johnson was the mayor of London, I was at an event with him, and he told me that year, largely students from India had brought to London £870 million by way of fees, just in that 1 year. So you can get an idea of the kind of economic aspects these things carry. And I think the sooner India also gets into the game, it'll be better. But we are completely out of time. And now turn over to the organizers. And I wish to thank all my co-panelists for bringing such light and wisdom to the discussion. I am certainly leaving this event a wiser man. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, sir. I think we had a very wonderful session and a lot of takeaways for all of us. So as we come to the end of this technical session 3, I would like to thank the President of AIU, Professor Tej Pratap ji, Vice President of AIU, Mr. Thirubasagam ji, Secretary General of AIU, Dr. Pankaj Mittal ji, President of SSU, Shri University, Mrs. Rajita Kulkarni ji, Vice Chancellor of Shri University, Professor Ajay Kumar Singh ji, and all the Honorable Vice Chancellors and other dignitaries and guests who are present today. On behalf of AIU and Shri University, I extend a heartfelt thanks to the Chairperson and to the Speaker. As a token of respect, we would like to offer a planter to you, Dinesh Singh sir. It's on the screen. Thank you. As a token of gratitude and appreciation, we would like to offer planters to all our speakers. Dr. Vidya ji, Mr. Francisco J. Marmolejo ji, Professor Varghese, and Mr. Anthony. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. Now I request.
We will be planting these trees in your name on our campus. So when you come to visit us, you will find a tree in your name. And at that time, you can look at it and water it yourself. So
one more reason to be back in Orissa.
Absolutely.
It's a wonderful idea, Rajita. It's really commendable.
Thank you.
I would request Ms. Mani Goswami to initiate the next session now.